welcome to another Fawcett Society Zoom event. And tonight we're not going to be talking about coronavirus, I promise. We've got a very different agenda item to discuss, and that is the subject of gender norms and stereotypes in early childhood. We've published a report today, which many of you may have spotted. It's been relatively well covered in the media, and we've been hot on social media talking about it. And tonight we're going to be sharing those findings with you in a bit more detail, and also engaging our panellists and hearing response from some of the commissioners who've been very much part of the process of developing the recommendations and coming up with this report. And we're going to be hearing from a minister in the Department for Education, Gillian Keegan, who is actually an old friend of Fawcett and who's going to be giving us her take on the findings from her perspective with her responsibility for apprenticeships. But before I really get into introducing the event, we're going to give you a bit of time to get into the room, or at least get into the virtual room, and to just fill in with a couple of other quick things from us. Firstly, as with all of these Zoom events, we are very conscious that we have to keep it a respectful space. We're going to be using the question and answer function, not the chat function tonight. So we'll post things in the chat occasionally, but the rest of the time we ask you to use the Q&A function if you want to put a question to the panel, and we will take questions probably towards the end of the event. But keep it respectful, keep it on topic, and we will be moderating it carefully as we go through. I also want to just shout out to our members and supporters and to our local groups, because this piece of work in particular has been funded by members. It's come out of our core funding, which our members effectively give us through their subscriptions and through their donations. And it's also been very much supported by volunteers who've gone out into their communities to do some of the research that we've published today. So the High Street audit, 141 shops in 35 locations, very much a product of our member engagement and our local groups, and we wouldn't have been able to do that without them. So huge thanks to them, and I hope they feel pleased to have been part of what is a really landmark piece of work. Now, we've been talking about coronavirus all year, and the only mention I am going to give to it is that we have a Christmas appeal live with refugee women and Women for Refugee Women, and it's a partnership appeal, so I would really encourage you to donate to that if you can. 50% of the takings will go to them, and we've been trying to run all of our work this year in a collaborative way with our sister organisations, because we can't beat coronavirus on our own, and we have to stand together with the women's sector, and that's been very much a theme for all of our work this year as we've partnered with 80 organisations in our campaign's response. So as we're just getting ready to start with the official sharing of the findings with you, the one other thing I wanted to say is this is an issue that touches everyone's lives. It's about women and men, boys and girls, it's about all of us. And this is actually quite unusual for Fawcett, because as you may have spotted, we mostly spend our time talking about women and girls. We don't spend so much time talking about the impact on men and boys. But for this issue, it is just as relevant to be talking about the impact on men and boys, because actually it affects their lives, and that in turn affects women's lives too. So this is really quite a unique thing for us to be focusing on something which is such an inclusive agenda, such a broad agenda, and really quite an ambitious piece of work as we've gone to look at the space of education, parenting, and the commercial sector. We wouldn't have been able to do it though without the input from all of these organisations and individuals who gave evidence to the Commission, and Andrew's going to share some of the findings with you in a moment. And in particular, I want to say a massive thank you to our commissioners, who have been a phenomenal team to work with, huge expertise around the table. I'm not going to name them all because there are too many to do so. We've been tweeting our thanks to them all today. You'll hear from a few of them tonight. But particular thanks to our co-chairs, Professor Becky Francis and David Lammy, who have really given a huge amount of time and expertise to the Commission, and we just could not have completed this work without them. So as always, with a small team at Fawcett, we're only able to do what we can do when we bring others on board and work in partnership, and that's what this Commission has been all about. And we started it 18 months ago, which seems like a long time ago now, to really explore the impact that gender norms and stereotypes have on children's lives in particular, looking at 0 to 7s, but then to consider the long-term effects, the long-term harms and impacts that those gender norms and stereotypes have. So I'm not going to talk anymore. I'm going to now hand over to Andrew and introduce him to present the findings to you. And then I'll introduce the rest of our panel as we go. Now, Andrew's been with Fawcett for 4 years. He's our policy and insight manager. He's someone I've worked incredibly closely with. I've relied on heavily to do a huge amount of work for the organisation, does a brilliant job. And as some of you may know, I'm leaving the organisation after today, and I shall really, really miss working with him. So I'm going to hand over to Andrew now to share the findings from this research and say a huge amount of this and credit for this work goes to him. So thank you, Andrew, for everything you've put into this, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Sam. I'm just going to share the presentation. Gender stereotypes are oversimplified generalizations that dictate what is acceptable or expected for women and girls and for men and boys. The evidence collected for our commission is those limitations start early, they hold many children back, and they cause significant problems across society in later life, but they can be challenged. We focused on the ages 0 to 7 because that's when the foundation of our kids' understanding of their place in the world is laid. Our focus is firmly on the impact that gender stereotypes have on both girls and boys, as Sam said. There is great work done that looks at one or the other, and what we've aimed to do is draw some of that together. We think there's a clear positive case for the benefits to our economy, to society, and to us as individuals as a result of challenging gender stereotypes. Let's start by looking at some of the numbers that explore that case for change. Let's begin with a 6. Research shows that gender stereotypes result in girls, by that age, avoiding subjects that they view as requiring them to be really, really smart. That reads across to lower take-up of STEM subjects in later life. Half of the drivers of the gender pay gap lie in the differences in the jobs and sectors that women and men work in. So this is a huge part of what drives economic gender inequality in our society. How about 14? Gender stereotyped expectations held by teachers and peers result in boys developing lower reading skills. That's why we end up with a 14 percentage point gap in boys' achievement at English Literature GCSE, because reading is deemed to not be for them. 36% of 7 to 10-year-old girls say they are made to feel their looks are the most important attribute, according to Girl Guiding research. That contributes to the dissatisfaction with their bodies, which research shows impacts on eating disorders and suicide attempts, as well as well-being overall. For both boys and girls, the Children's Society find that those who hold more gender stereotype views and whose friends emphasize stereotypes have poorer well-being. Finally, 66. 66 billion is what the Home Office research estimates as the and social costs of domestic abuse each year. And there's a significant body of research that links stereotypes to violence and says that if we challenge gender stereotyped attitudes and behaviours with boys in early childhood, we can reduce violence against women and girls in the future. Those are just some of the impacts we can put numbers to. Gender stereotypes can contribute to the abuse and harassment of LGBT young people and adults, and they intersect with stereotypes about race to cause harm, such as the high levels of school exclusion of Black boys. But gender stereotypes continue to be widespread and deeply embedded. What is needed is a concerted effort by parents, educators, companies, and government in order to create change. Each one of those influences is woven together. No one part of society can make the whole change needed when it comes to gender stereotypes. We all have to pull together. That's why, when we established the Commission on Gender Stereotypes in early 2019, our aim was to build that consensus across those different areas, both on the harm that gender stereotypes do and also on the positive blueprint for change. The report has detailed, practical recommendations, and quite a lot of them, that make up that blueprint, and I'll be able to touch only lightly on those today, so we encourage you to read the full report. Our commissioners have been drawn from politics, academia, business, civil society and public services, and very capably co-chaired by Professor Becky Francis and David Lammy MP. We've drawn on a really wide range of evidence, an extensive review of existing literature, 6 evidence sessions with experts presenting to the Commission, a call for evidence to the public with over 1,000 responses, over 1,000 parents and over 1,000 practitioners polled through online panels, and over 26 in-depth interviews with parents of young children. In addition to all that research, in autumn 2019, our local groups, members and supporters audited 141 high street shops to explore how gender stereotypes persist in their in-store marketing. We conducted online audits of the websites of 33 retailers of children's products and of the top 10 YouTube children's channels. So there's a lot of work gone into that from a lot of people to ensure that we properly understand this issue. So what did we find out? When it comes to education, our research finds that the majority of practitioners in early years and key stage 1 settings, from childminders through to teachers, recognise the harm that gender stereotypes cause to children. 64% agree that gender assumptions affect boys' ability to talk about their emotions, for example. We also find that 80% of parents agree that they want to see their child's school or nursery treat boys and girls the same, with the same expectations and opportunities. There is support for change in education. But research also shows that practitioners can unnecessarily separate boys and girls through both language and physical segregation, things like different coat pegs for the boys and girls. We find that practitioners who hold gender stereotypical attitudes influence children's interests and their success in different subjects. They've been found to pay more attention to boys and girls in class and to encourage children when they engage in behaviour that's stereotypically expected. For example, helping out behaviours from girls and physical play from boys. On the flip side, there's also strong evidence that work to counter those stereotypes can be effective. That includes promising work on whole school approaches, one of which we're going to hear about from one of our panelists. And that work really effectively change attitudes and behaviours. So to build on that, we asked practitioners if they've seen or heard the kinds of actions and behaviours that research suggests can perpetuate gender stereotypes. We found that more than half have often or sometimes witnessed people say boys will be boys when boys misbehave in their settings. 6 in 10 say that they see the assumption that boys and girls will want to do different activities as commonplace within their workplaces. And a third have still seen that really basic, obvious gender segregation of boys and girls being split into groups for activities like lining up or games. Our aim is not to point the finger at practitioners, but to recognise that the impact that they have on children's perceptions of stereotypes. So there are practical tips in our report that outline some of the steps they can take. Things like praising children equally, boys for caring and girls for taking risks. Things like thinking about the language they use. Start the day with good morning children rather than good morning boys and girls, which draws out that difference and highlights it. And vitally, engaging in conversations with children when they try out genders can't do ballet, for example, and constructively challenging them with real world examples that undermine the stereotype. So what about government policy? Well, in initial training, which Department for Education Policy helps to set, our poll found that for 4 in 10 practitioners, discussion of stereotypes was limited to an occasional reference or was not present at all. That's not then routinely addressed in continuous professional development that teachers get after that. In their current role, 4 in 10 practitioners had received no continuous professional development at all on challenging gender stereotypes. And yet our research finds that practitioners strongly support challenging gender stereotypes. Our survey shows that they want training, and perhaps surprisingly, given the widespread understanding that educators feel over-assessed, probably rightly, there's a clear role for the regulator, Ofsted, in doing this. So together, we're calling for government to revise teacher training frameworks and promote continuous professional development on this so that all practitioners get the training that they say they need and want. To make actively challenging gender stereotypes integral to early years and Key Stage 1 practice, all the way through from the curriculum to teaching standards to Ofsted inspections. And also, we're calling on government and institutional funders to fund evaluations of those really promising whole school approaches using a random control trial method in order to unlock funding and buy-in for wider rollout of these methods. The commercial sector obviously has a huge influence on childhood. The research evidence shows that the way companies use stereotypes to sell products and media to children sends clear messages to them about what's appropriate for boys and girls. But those differences, things like the colours that children like and the toys they prefer, are not innate. They are constructed by the society that we live in. It also shows that those stereotype products can cause real harm. For example, boys are much less likely to play with toys which emphasise caring roles, things like dolls and playhouses, while everything from girls' clothing to the toys that they're advertised pushes them away from STEM activities. So it's important to say at this stage that the approach we advocate when it comes to the commercial sector is not to shift from gender segregated pink and blue options to a kind of beige, gender neutral alternative, which is sometimes how the argument around this is caricatured. As you can see from the branding for the report, our aim is for the whole range of experiences and options and the whole palette to be available to all children and used by companies when advertising them. At one level, the current system relying on gender stereotyping to sell products works because it's the easy, comfortable, business as usual option. However, the evidence we've heard as a commission shows three things. Firstly, that it causes harm. Secondly, that parents want to see change. 66% say that they want to see companies voluntarily advertise toys to boys and to girls in the same way. 58% want to see the government require it. It also shows that when businesses have made change, they haven't seen that kind of a negative commercial impact. It's not just when it comes to toys that stereotypes persist. They're on YouTube. We found that stereotypes were prevalent in the content on YouTube channels, with women underrepresented. All of the bus drivers in the top 10 kids YouTube channels who, which had a version of Wheels on the Bus were men. Most of the teachers they featured were women. Analysis of UK Kids TV, updating 2008 research, finds that there's no increase in female characters. They're stuck at 36%. And that a third of television shows perpetuate gender stereotypes in characters' roles. We can think of popular shows like Paw Patrol with just one pink girl dog character, or the enragingly incompetent dad in Peppa Pig, who is a new father myself, I find deeply, deeply annoying. In books, a child is 1.6 times more likely to read a book with a male lead and 7 times more likely to read about a male villain. Characters who are professors are overwhelmingly white men. BAME characters are much more likely to exist as part of the background than as lead characters. What do our children's clothes say about them, or our expectations about them? We looked at the slogans used for girls' and boys' clothing and found marked differences, as this slide shows. That runs into the way that they are marketed too. On the Next boys t-shirt page, the framing text was adventure ready. On the girls page on that website, it was designed to delight. The underlying messages are clear. Emotions and passivity are for girls, while being active and controlling are for boys. And that needs to change. So what change do we want to see when it comes to the commercial sector? Gender is built into the toy industry at a number of points. Company business units are often still split by gender. At the point of setting a product design brief, often manufacturers still specify that it ought to be marketed to a single gender. And at the point of market research, often single gender groups of children are used. So we're calling for companies to pledge to change those things. We're also calling in relation to their advertising and marketing to use inclusive language, representation, colour and design. The French government has successfully worked with industry on a compact to end stereotyping in toys. And we want to see our government build on and replicate that approach here. And we want to see book and TV content creators revise their editorial and commission guidelines to strive for balanced representation and an end to stereotype depictions across their output. And for clothing companies to commit to ending the princessification of girls and the toxification of boys through gender stereotype slogans in their clothing. And finally, parenting. So children are influenced by what goes on in their home and close community, including a wide range of family types and caregivers. When it comes to parents, this isn't just an issue for mothers, which is important to say. It's also important that we look at fathers. Sometimes the work on this doesn't do that sufficiently. We think that making a difference will require parents to be open to exploring and understanding their own views on gender and being open to challenging themselves. It's clear from our survey data that many parents are already engaged in this work, but also that the change that parents can make are closely tied in with changes in other sectors. For example, parents are influenced by commercial pressures just as their children are. Our data finds that across the board, parents agree that people treat boys and girls differently at an early age because of gender and that it has negative consequences. 74% of parents agree that people treat them differently from an early age. 63% agree that children are treated differently on the basis of race as well. And there's strong agreement with the impact on boys' emotions and on girls' career paths. So parents do recognise this as an issue that they want to see change on. But how do parents themselves have an impact? So the research shows that the opportunities they give to children, such as asking girls to do domestic chores more than boys or encouraging children to play with stereotypical toys, can have an impact. The research shows that different expectations of boys and girls kick in early, arising from as early as 11 months, where research has shown that parents underestimate a 11-month-old girl child's crawling ability and overestimate an 11-month-old boy child crawling ability. Our survey finds that carries on into thinking about future jobs. Construction was seen as a possibility for 22% of sons, but only 3% of daughters, and parents are much more likely to picture girls as teachers or care workers. In their beliefs, the language they use, and whether they role model equality, the impact that parents have is significant. The report sets out a host of tips for parents who want to challenge some of those ways that stereotypes are repeated generation after generation. And what do we want from policymakers when it comes to parenting? So I mentioned role modelling. A big part of that is the role that fathers take or don't take in engaging with childcare. We find widespread agreement that fathers should be given longer, better paid time off when a child is born if they wanted, with 69% of fathers and 76% of mothers agreeing. The evidence from other countries is clear that this would help equalise paid and unpaid work within families and affect the impressions that our children have of what is for fathers and what is for mothers. Becoming a parent for the first time is a key moment, so we want to see antenatal classes and health visitors being supported to share materials and to reflect on their own practice in relation to gender stereotypes. And we want to, and that work that we discussed earlier around early childhood education settings can effectively equip practitioners to engage with parents on this issue too. Thank you.
Brilliant, thanks very much, Andrew. Okay, wonderful. There were a couple of little technical delays on the line there, but I think we got it. It was only a few little words that we may have missed, but it was a really, really insightful and comprehensive presentation. Now, if you've got questions about the research, you can put a question in the chat. Andrew isn't disappearing immediately, so if you've got a particular question you want to put to him, you can do that now. But I'll move to Gillian Keegan because I know she hasn't got much time to spare to be with us. So let me move to introducing Gillian, who's going to respond from a DFE perspective. Now, it's fair to say this isn't Gillian's brief, this area, so she's doing us a favour in being here tonight and responding from government, but she didn't hesitate when I asked her. So to her credit, she's here. Gillian is the Parliamentary Under Secretary of State for Apprenticeships and Skills at the Department for Education. So it definitely does have a relevance for her brief because obviously the apprenticeships that boys and girls do are very different, and I'm sure she'll say a bit more about that in a minute. I first met Gillian when she was running Women to Win for the Conservative Party, and then she went on to co-chair our local government commission with Margaret Hodge that we ran back in 2017, and did a brilliant job for us then. And has, since obviously become an MP, is now MP for Chichester, where she was first elected in 2017, and actually has a background in business and has worked and lived abroad. She's got quite a varied background, and hails from Knowlesley up in Liverpool. So Gillian, I'm going to hand over to you to give us your first reflections on what you've heard and thinking about it from your DFE brief perspective.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Sam. It is always a pleasure to work with you, and as you say, I didn't hesitate when my colleague, who's the Minister for Children and Families, unfortunately couldn't make the event. So I'm here. As you say, it's not fully my brief because it's not the early years and the children and families bit, but as Andrew pointed out in his fantastic presentation there, it has a massive impact later on, and we all know that, and that's what we've been dealing with, the sort of whether it comes to equal pay or all of these things, these inequalities that last throughout a lifetime. A lot of them come down to what you end up doing in life, which comes down to all those influences in your life. So it is something that I am really passionate about as well, and thank you to the Fawcett Society for inviting me. So I am glad to be here, and it is important. How can we tackle these dangerous and destructive gender stereotypes in education and throughout, beyond really? I believe, like all of you, in a diverse education for children, and like all of you, I'm sure, believe that opportunities should be open to all, no matter what your gender is. And I don't just believe this because it boosts our economic progress and reduces economic inequality, and I don't just believe it because I want to see more female representation in the STEM workforce, or some of those fantastic high-earning roles. And I don't just believe it because I want to tear down the stereotypes, because they do lead to poor outcomes and mental health concerns and many other things as well. I want to challenge these stereotypes because they're just wrong. And actually all of us prove on a daily basis, or try to prove on a daily basis, that they are just wrong, they're outdated, and they're harmful, and they hold us back as a society, economically, socially, culturally, and they hold individuals back from realizing their dreams and maximizing and unlocking their unlimited potential. So I think that's something that I really do care about this area. And there has been some progress, I think. I want to tell you a bit of my own personal story, which would horrify anybody today. But, you know, in the 80s, I grew up, as Sam said, in Knowsley in Merseyside, and, you know, went to the normal comprehensive school. And in the 80s, when you came to choose some of those options, which were the sort of craft, design, tech, art options, they had a name, I can't remember what it was. In my school, you could only choose, if you were a girl, you could only choose the home economics, I think it's now food technology, and needlework and craftwork. That was the only options given to you. And it was something to do with the scheduling of PE, so that they had the girls and the boys like different because of PE. And the guys got to do engineering, technical drawing and woodwork. Well, I was really unhappy with this. And my mother went up to the school and, you know, sort of launched a one-woman campaign to get me to be able to do these topics. And I now tell people, you know, that from this nosy comprehensive school that was a failing comprehensive school, I got 10 O-levels. And you could only actually do 7. Everyone asked me, how did you get 10? It's because actually I ended up doing the whole lot because my mother forced the school to let me do the boys' subjects. And they were the subjects that actually gave me the differentiated me to enable me to get a really good quality apprenticeship at the age of 16. It was those subjects that did it. And so I feel very strongly about this. And of course, there's been a lot of progress since then. You wouldn't ever be put in that situation now, but that's not that long ago. And still, the outcomes are not much different in many cases. So today I'd like to speak to you about how we continue the work together to make sure that all children and young people can follow their dreams. And I know that all of those listening today will agree that gender stereotypes cause harm to children. The Unlimited Potential report published shows that 70% of practitioners agree that treating children differently from an early age based on assumptions about their race or ethnicity or gender has negative consequences. And this is also supported by those not working on the front line, with 80% of parents want their children's school or nursery to treat boys and girls the same expectations, the same opportunities for all. So in a way, we're kind of pushing an open door, you would think. Everybody wants it. And as the report highlights, men are hugely underrepresented in the early childhood education workforce. As Sam said, this is an unusual twist in terms of force and the focus in this report, because actually it's showing that, you know, there are very many areas where men are really underrepresented, and potentially as an impact, again, of enforcing and reinforcing these gender stereotypes, particularly when you think of early years and teaching. And in government, we do share your desire to see this change. So that's why last year we funded a project to encourage more men into the early years settings, provide more diverse role models for children before they start school. And the project, which was run by the Fatherhood Institute, was aimed to break down those barriers that prevent men from entering into careers in children's early education, and developed a number of practical resources to support both staff and employers. And this is important because, as Andrew said, you know, it's not only in cartoons that all the teachers are women, or in the adverts or whatever. It's in real life, in primary schools, in early years. They are dominated, those professions, by women, and not many men are in those professions. So the work we've been doing includes some myth busters, you know, how-to guides, online content to support male recruitment, you know, which are available via the Men in the Early Years website. So there's a specific focus on this in the website. And to help this effort, we've updated the National Careers Service, online job profiles, upskilled Job Centre Plus work coaches so they can pinpoint people in this direction, developing their knowledge of the early years sector, and promoting childcare as a career for men and women from all different backgrounds. It's a brilliant career, and it's also a brilliant career that can lead into many other directions and areas. There's so many specialisms in there, as well as the complexity of things that we now understand about early years and early years development as we put those into practice. Now, as a former apprentice, something I'm particularly excited about is our employer trailblazer groups, and that's creating new apprenticeship groups into all these sectors. And when a lot of people think about apprenticeships, it still happens now, another lot of stereotyping. First of all, everybody imagines someone with a high-vis jacket and a helmet on their head, and they're normally doing something to do with a trade. And that's kind of the sort of image of a lot of apprenticeships. There are now apprenticeships in 600 different occupations. The one I signed off last week, which I hope is going to have loads of girls doing it, is a space engineering technician. There's a zookeeper I signed off a couple of weeks before that. The range of occupations that you can go into with an apprenticeship is vast now. An apprenticeship, in a way, is another way which, as you're going to be employed, you're getting paid, you get training at the same time. It's also brilliant in terms of lowering the barriers or hurdles to people, A, knowing how to get into something, B, having the wherewithal and the resources to be able to get into something. And I think social mobility, as a social mobility tool, apprenticeships are pretty much second to none. And I feel that from my own experience, because it was my social mobility ticket, but I still believe it's really valid today. So I think this is something that I'm very passionate about, and I think can make a massive difference. And I now go out of my way to make sure everything nothing has a hard hat in it, nothing has a high-vis jacket, nothing is reinforcing stereotypes. And, you know, we have the girls doing different things and guys doing different things. If only it was as easy in practice as it is in terms of the media, etc., and the campaigns. But there's other things coming as well that I think will make a difference to this. In September, we launched a new early years T-level qualification. This is basically what you can do at 16 to get into and onto more career-led study. And that will, I think, open up professions even more to different groups. So, you know, you can start education and early years is one of them, and digital is another one, plus construction. And it's not construction actually, you know, a specific trade. It's construction design, surveying and planning. So it's the higher level, higher earning jobs. And really they're available, and we're marketing them now to young students, so that from, you know, they can start thinking about these things, and they can take that route from the age of 16. And they can take out, I think, some of what really happens is people have quite limited and narrow role models. They make quite limited and narrow career choices based on what they know. And actually, in some cases, it's better to start to investigate and go into some of these areas, and you'll discover a whole load of careers. And T-levels and high-level apprenticeships are a really great route to do that, and a low-risk route to do that. So I'm going to be banging the drum for them. To support also, at the same time, we've made wider reforms to the early years foundation stage statutory framework, and that will be implemented nationally from September next year. And to support the delivery of the reforms, we did publish a non-statutory curriculum guidance, which is Development Matters. And this makes explicit the importance of challenging gender stereotypes, something you've called for, and encourages practitioners to provide children with materials which confront those gender stereotypes. And we'll continue to keep Development Matters under review and plan to seek feedback through the early adopter year to strengthen the guidance across all areas. And I'm sure that's something that you'll be welcoming and be involved in. Of course, you know, you don't need, you will not need telling that the challenging these stereotypes is something we need to continue at all stages of education. And, you know, obviously with the help of employers, we can do this. Employers launching T-levels, by the way, are something that are designed with employers, and they're highly technical, but they're very 21st century, because they've been designed by employers who are basically, as well as really desperately to trying to get more diversity into their organizations, get more women in tech, get more men in early years, if that's the part of the organization you're working in. They're really very much wanting to get more people doing the skills that they have got massive skills gaps for. So this is where you also get the better opportunities and the more valuable opportunities as well, which can help with the gender pay gap. So we've been, you know, I'm truly excited about the launch of T-levels, and it is a huge step forward. I think it will make a difference. We also have apprenticeship diversity champions, and we have networks of different networks supporting gender representation in apprenticeships, a BAME representation in apprenticeships. We all know we haven't done nearly enough in all of these areas, but really it's about knowledge. It's about people knowing what their options are and being able to see very clearly in front of them what those options are. And we are seeing progress in getting more women into STEM, more girls doing some of the STEM subjects as well, and more doing apprenticeships. And I think this is going to continue. We've also complemented our work in the area of technical education with institutes of technology, which we've set up across the country. And again, these aim to give young people technical skills that get them into higher paid careers, and to make it really easy for them to be able to access this. And their collaboration between FE colleges and universities and employers such as Microsoft, Nissan, Siemens, etc. So they'll specialise in delivering some of the higher level technical training in STEM subjects. And of course, we will be really focused on trying to make sure that we have gender balance. These new institutes will obviously focus on trying to attract women and underrepresented groups into technical disciplines and sectors. And lastly, I'd like to mention the new Model Institute for Technology and Engineering, a new higher education provider that's launched this month. And it's taken a radical and welcome approach to training the next generation of engineers, including recruiting students from non-traditional backgrounds and aiming for gender balanced cohorts. It will also offer accelerated degrees, so meaning students can complete their undergraduate degrees in 2 years and a master's degree in 3. And so last week it invited applications for their opening cohort, and I'm excited to see what they can achieve. So we know the problem we're trying to solve for. We know that we've got some of the important rungs in the ladder to solving for it, and we're trying many things to do it. But, you know, I don't underestimate the size of the challenge. This has been a challenge that's been ongoing for many years. It's in pretty much every country in the world. There's a few countries that you know, don't conform to this, but they're few and far between. The vast majority do struggle with this. But taken together, I think the reforms are something that we should be proud of. They're bold. They'll help more women into technical, high-skilled, high-paying jobs. And these reforms will also help us as level up education across the country. As someone who comes from Knowsley, I often sit here and think, as the first apprentice to be an apprenticeship and skills minister, I sit here and think about that girl in a Knowsley Comprehensive School right now, and how she gets there to here or beyond. And, you know, what are the routes? It can't just be the odd one getting lucky or finding the right apprenticeship or whatever. What are the routes, and how can they be plentiful enough so that people have those choice? And so no matter where you're born, where you live, regardless of your background, your race, your gender, what your parents did, or what they don't know, what you can do, no matter what it is you're facing, that you can build those rewarding careers. So I'm pleased that much of what we've spoke about today shows that we're aligned in terms of recognizing the problem, wanting to solve the problem. It's not an easy problem to solve, but I have faith that working together, we can make changes that will benefit all, and you certainly have our commitment to that. So thank you.
Gillian, that was great. Thank you very much. And there's a huge amount of work going on, some which we didn't know about. So it's good to have a full range of what you're doing. I mean, obviously, we focused on the 0 to 7s because, you know, we felt that we had to start earlier. And all that, I mean, brilliant work you're doing on apprenticeships, but some of it is a bit late, really, given that a lot of the attitudes and barriers are already sort of set in place by the time children are 7. So that's why we've kind of come upstream and looked at that early years space. But I think it does very much dovetail with everything you're doing and makes sense in terms of why, you know, we need to make those changes, because actually the problem is experienced by girls later on. I did just want to put 1 or 2 questions to you. I know you've got to go, but I'm going to go to just one of them, which was just on the point about the different apprenticeships that boys and girls do and the way they're valued. And we can see that in terms of the rates of pay that they get for these apprenticeships. It's all about undervaluing women's work, right? So you talked reference to sort of unequal pay, the gender pay gap. And we see that play out in the rates that apprenticeships are set as well. So what can you do about that? Can we improve the value of, say, some of the caring roles, for example, those childcare apprenticeships, that we start to value traditional women's work more? You know, what's the solution to that? And is government able to put more money into that?
Well, I mean, that is a challenge, isn't it? Because I mean, you know, I don't know if you remember, Sam, that myself and Louise Haig set up an APPG a couple of years ago on social care and the workforce issues in social care. We have massive gaps, 120,000 gaps in terms of the skill set, and yet largely it's women. Actually, a lot of people were coming from abroad as well. It wasn't there was a lot of immigration used to fill the skills gaps, and yet we still have massive skills gaps. And, you know, the reason when we looked into it and worked with a lot of those organizations was the professionalization of some of these things, you know. So having an apprenticeship standard, being able to go up the levels, being able to correctly identify that these are the skills, and this is actually a higher skill job, and then here's an even higher skilled version of it. So actually I met with Donna Kinnair the other day, who's the RCN lead, who I met on Question Time, funnily enough. You know, we had a conversation about this, which is how we can, we've got a lot now, a lot of those apprenticeship standards in nursing. There's about nursing and social care, there's about 70 of them. And I think it's making sure that they go up the levels, because, you know, these levels are tagged to a professionalization and a pay as well. So you would normally think that supply and demand would mean the pay is higher, but I think a lot of these issues we've had have been probably masked a little bit by the low skills road that we've been on for a while, and or the, you know, EU migration and immigration, which was all very easy, and you know, businesses didn't have to go the extra effort to think, how am I going to retain people in this? How am I going to value them and recognize them so that they want to you know, stay here and go up the skills ladder? And I think that's something that we really do need to continue the work on. But here, where I am in here, we're definitely going to be doing that, which is really going to professionalize it. But I mean, you're right. There's so much to do I'm hoping coronavirus, if I'm honest, has made a massive difference. I mean, you know, when I was talking to Donna and others, and she was telling me about the amount of people now who are applying for some of the nursing openings they have, all various levels. I mean, there's 70 different ones. So, you know, it can go into various specialisms with children in early years to dementia. And, you know, she was talking about actually the fact we've been through this global pandemic, the fact the NHS have been in the spotlight, the fact that they, you know, the whole country is, you know, so indebted to them for their work, whether it's in the care homes, in the nursing homes, in the homes of people who are, you know, elderly and need support and don't have their families being able to pop in, or, you know, in the NHS. That, I think, has also been, you know, a really, really good advert. And in terms of how you get the pay up, you have to get up the levels. As you get up the levels, you get the pay up. So I need to make it really easy for people to take those when they're in work, to be able to upskill, to be able to keep those skills, because then they're more valuable. If you're more valuable, you know, and the demand outstrips the supply, then it will work.
And professionalising the care workforce, both in social care and childcare, is something very much that we've been calling for too. So let's hope that we can try and achieve that. Gillian, I'm conscious of time and I know you need to go, so I'm going to let you go and I'm going to move on to our next speaker. But thank you so much for joining us, and congratulations for being the first Minister for Apprenticeships who's actually done one. I don't think it's just our class-ridden society, it just shows that's a major achievement. But lovely to see you. Thank you.
Thank you, and good luck, Sam.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Now, I'm going to introduce our next speaker, who's Professor Becky Francis. Let me just get her bio to hand. All my notes are by my side. Now, Becky, as I said, is being co-chairing this commission with David Lammy. Very fortunate to have her because she's such an expert in her field. She is the Chief Executive of the Education Endowment Foundation, and she was previously Director of the UCL Institute for Education, and before that, Professor of Education and Social Justice at King's College London. Throughout her career, she's sought to maximise the impact of academic research by working closely with teachers and policymakers, and she spearheaded high-profile research programmes assessing the impact of major reforms in the English school system. Becky's academic expertise and extensive publications centre on social identities, gender, race and social class, and inequalities in educational contexts. She's best known for her body of work on social identities and educational attainment, especially gender attainment, and her contributions to gender theory regarding the social construction of gender in educational contexts. So, Becky, with that introduction, you're going to have to speak for longer than I did introducing you. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Sam, and for the warm introduction. Now, I published my first book about how gender stereotypes constrain and regulate kids' lives and behaviours back over 20 years ago in 1998. Called Power Plays, it reported the consequences of occupying stereotypical roles in the classroom, where I noticed that girls often took the role of facilitators and helpers to boys, while boys took on more dominant roles in interaction. And meanwhile, boys felt limited in their expressions, but that they'd be called names and bullied if they played with girls' toys. Now, what's of really grave concern reading this Commission report is that the findings that these stereotypes that those kids were subject to are still prevailing. And indeed, while some things have got better, as we've been hearing from Gillian, in some areas, things seem to have got even worse. Children now get to see a greater diversity of representation and female representation in some areas in the social sphere, which was different to the 1970s and 80s, and in elements of culture, again, as we've been hearing. But the marketing and media to which they and their families are subject is perhaps even more pervasive and still sends relentless messages that girls and boys are very different with different appropriate behaviours and interests. Now, what does it mean for young children that while boys receive messages about dinosaurs and space being appropriate from the earliest age, and that action and adventure are appropriate for them, girls are still told that they're princesses, with all the connotations of passivity, decoration, and the need for rescue that our cultural history implies in those narratives and roles. Research, of course, shows the consequences of these early messages for future associations with different activities and curriculum subjects, with then a knock-on effect on future interests and careers. It's already been mentioned how these areas apply to my field of study and expertise, education. Andrew made reference to the gender gap for literacy, for example, and particularly reading. But when we break down intersectionality there, we see even bigger gaps than the ones that Andrew mentioned. So for example, for white working class boys and Black Caribbean heritage boys on free school meals too, those gaps for early reading are even starker. And this message that reading is for girls is having an enormously detrimental impact on future educational progress there. Likewise, in terms of girls, their interests in particular subject choices, as we've heard, then have knock-on effects that have changed in some areas, you know, the take-up, for example, of medicine as a field of study by young women is very different to when I was growing up in the 1980s. But if we look at, you know, whether it's engineering or particularly areas like computing, which ironically are of course areas of growth, they remain incredibly heavily male-dominated. So the point is that these early stereotypes, which may seem harmless fun, have actually lasting impacts on life courses. It's not, of course, wrong for kids to want to be princesses or astronauts or to love dinosaurs or unicorns, but the preferences shouldn't be based on gender. And just to pick out a few elements of this report that have particularly impressed me and caught my attention. First of all is the rigor of the report. You know, 2,300 respondents, an audit of 140 high street shops, and a range of other research methods underpinning this report. And then a couple of kind of standout findings that were unexpected to me. Firstly, as I've already mentioned, the cacophony and variety of gender stereotypes that young kids are still subject to across a range of areas in their daily lives, from toys to online, from the early years settings to the family home. You know, that prevalence is everywhere. Then the point that 2/3 of early years practitioners say gendered assumptions affect boys' ability to talk about their emotions. You know, that stymieing of kids' expressions of self at such an early age is very disturbing, I think. That half of practitioners report gendered pet names and expressions are used in their settings, and that 2/3 of parents want to see commercial companies advertise to girls and boys in the same way. So I think this is going to need a terrific collective effort from all of us to address this. I think that this report and the myriad of convincing recommendations can really galvanise us and chart a path to better practice. As Gillian remarked, everybody wants to see change here. And I think it's down to commercial providers, parent groups, government, educationalists, and other sector stakeholders to come together now to challenge stereotypes and ensure that all young people are equally able to engage the opportunities they deserve. Thank you, that's the key message. And while I'm on thank yous, I also want to congratulate Sam and Andrew for this really important piece of work, and indeed to all at Fawcett, David Lammy and the other commissioners for pulling this together. Thanks so much.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Becky. Thank you. And you've been a huge, huge contributor to this. So we have to echo that thanks back to you. I'm going to move to the panel now. We'll seamlessly move to the panel. I'm going to introduce our next speakers. Let me find my notes. Now, we're each going to get a few minutes just to say some opening remarks. Then we're going to go to Q&A, and that's when I'll be able to bring some of your questions in. I know some of you have put questions in the chat. Becky's staying on the panel, so she'll be able to respond too. So we haven't forgotten your questions, and hopefully we'll get to some of them at least. So let me introduce them to you. Firstly, we've got Jess Day, campaigner at Let Toys Be Toys. Now, Let Toys Be Toys, many of you will know, has been leading the campaign on tackling gender stereotypes in the toy sector for many, many years. They've done a brilliant job. Jess joined Let Toys Be Toys in 2013, motivated by her shock at the different messages to her son and daughter about the toys and media and the adults around them. She's been particularly involved in the Let Toys Be Toys website and in the campaign's original research into how toys are presented on the website and TV ads. And outside the campaign, she works for a digital agency supporting charities and non-profits with their campaigns and fundraising. So welcome, Jess. Then we have Owen, who's the operations manager at Future Men. Owen's role is broad and varied, and he supervises a team of fathers' development work, coordinating projects across London. Very much about advocating for the needs of young dads and expectant dads in local and national forums, and including the all-party group on fatherhood, which obviously David Lammy has been chairing. Delivering training on those issues related to those subjects for professionals. He's got extensive direct experience in this area, working closely with agencies and most importantly with fathers and male carers at crucial stages of their lives. And he's brought really unique expertise to our commission, so welcome, Owen. And then finally, Janine Hayat from UBU. She grew up in America from a Pakistani, Irish, Italian heritage home, and has then come over to the UK, worked first as a lawyer, and has then gone on to train to be part of this UBU organisation to really change secondary school practice in teaching. And really thinking about, again, through her own lived experience of watching her own two children, a son and a daughter, she grew frustrated with how long we wait to talk to kids about gender stereotypes. We have to start young, and that's been very much a message from this commission too. And how too often we only talk to girls and not to boys. So she co-founded UBU to start breaking down the barriers children face as they arise. So it's really great to have you all with us on this panel. Janine, I'm going to come to you first actually to pick up some of the themes on this theme of education. Just tell us a bit more about your work and how you tackle gender stereotypes and also the sort of intersectional stereotypes that we've been talking about.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm Janine. At UBU, we work to break down gender stereotypes for primary school children in classrooms and at home. And we do that through an in-school program and through activity boxes that children take home and do with an adult to extend their learning beyond the school gates. And kind of through my own background growing up in a Muslim and multicultural household, and kind of growing up with parents who weren't that fussed about gender stereotypes, or like kind of didn't feel enraged about them, but certainly would feel enraged about any barriers that were put in front of me, and felt enraged about kind of any difficulties I would face in pursuing the career I'd want to. I kind of came with that perspective, as well as my training as a secondary school teacher, and seeing, as we've said before, that it's often just too late to start talking about this at secondary school. So our vision is that no child leaves primary school believing that their gender limits their potential. And I think that's probably one that we all share. So I'm really pleased to see the findings of the report bringing together all these different facets. So we feel strongly that schools working alongside families can undo the stereotypes that are so dangerous for our kids. But as we've noted already, we need to start intervening early. We need to think about the damage being done to boys as well as to girls. And we need to reach a broader group of families and children with this message than we have reached in the past if we really want to turn the dial. We can't just be preaching to the choir about this. So I was really glad that the report focused on the early years and also acknowledged that complexity of how our identities interact with each other. And I'll also just say that stereotypes are embedded in children constantly, as we heard from Andrew's findings as well. And we need to be breaking them down constantly. And schools hold great potential for this, making every child feel that they are enough as they were born and that their potential is limitless goes to the very heart of what education should be. And so I was also really pleased that the report recommends that combating gender stereotypes be part of the training of every teacher, because it should be core to what being a teacher does. And if we equip parents and teachers with the knowledge and tools they need, they actually can make a difference here.
Brilliant, thanks very much. Now, Owen, I'm going to come to you. Tell us a bit more about your work with dads and how you see this issue playing out through their day-to-day lives.
Yeah, okay, so thanks for inviting me along, Sam, and hello to everybody. So Future Men, we're a specialist charity that provides emotional and practical support for boys and young men particularly, but in terms of fatherhood, men and male carers to men of all ages. We're a practice-based organisation, and through our practice-led services, we work from childhood all the way through to help them become kind of healthy, dynamic future men, which is aspirational, and I think really important when working with boys and men, particularly from marginalised communities. We work from structured school programs, from kind of like towards the end of primary school into the transition into secondary school, were really important and vulnerable time for many boys and young men as well. And we work as well in the community in youth hubs and through individual one-to-one sessions and outreach work. And we provide kind of vital support and advocacy that changes boys and men's lives for the better, in our opinion. We focus our work with boys and men who face structural discrimination and disadvantage, including, as some people were already mentioning, intersectionalities of race, income, and particular communities or cultures that the men we support live in. We underpin this work with an understanding of masculinities, which is some parts theoretical, but mostly, again, born out of our practice over the years and what the men and boys we work with tell us about the realities of their lives and their thoughts and their beliefs. And whether the issues fatherhood, sexual health, or healthy relationships, underachievement academically, or criminality, we're interested in why boys and men do the things that they do, and interested in what we can do about that, especially if it's negative or harmful to themselves or those around them. So understanding this masculinity kind of includes a view that there are a variety of sometimes competing masculinities, kind of always playing out against each other, just as there are for everybody in life. And a lot of these competing masculinities are determined by those intersectional aspects, things like race, like class, like sexuality, disability, the geography of where you live, your religion, your culture, and we strive to grapple with these all of the time in our work, and we're constantly learning, you know, and we encourage others to do the same, which is why we were so kind of honoured and proud to be asked to be part of the commission, to be able to bring kind of all the years our experience, but also to advocate for the voice of our service users in this forum, because, you know, as you said right at the top of the session today, you know, these stereotypes are not only harmful to women, they're harmful to boys. And you know, the obvious statement I'll make here is that half of the men we work with, half of the fathers in the fathers team we work with, have daughters as well as sons. And there is a kind of tired trope played out in early years and in education sometimes, that the time to call for men is when sons or boys are showing particularly challenging behavior, and we need to rein in male stereotypes on them to kind of correct this troublesome behavior. But actually, you know, many of the boys and young men we work with don't necessarily have that in their immediate familial setup. And they also maybe are drawing down negative stereotypes from the ones they do have around them. So our work has kind of led us to this belief, you know, that when they then buck up against statutory services in their lives, whether that be because of their own behavior or something to do with their children's well-being, they face structural stereotypes about the kind of men they are, depending on their race and their background, or sometimes based on behaviors they may have exhibited to that point beforehand. But there's this belief that we can just discard them at this point, especially in the realm of parenting, and marginalize them. And that's not good for their children, and it's not good for the men. So whilst obviously keeping child protection at the forefront of what we're doing and making sure that women and children are safe and that men are held accountable for behavior that is criminal or abusive, we also need to understand that the vast majority of men that we come across don't engage in those behaviors and want to bring out positive change for themselves and for them children. And these transitional points in their lives, like fatherhood, are key moments to do this.
Brilliant. That's really, really important work. And I think, you know, our report is so much richer for having your contribution to it, Owen. So thank you very much for that. Now, Jess, I'm going to come to you. And I think the thing I was struck by when I looked at your work is how much success you've had actually in a really difficult field in trying to persuade big corporates to actually change their behaviour. And so tell us a bit about that. Tell us a bit about your engagement with this issue through your
Thank you.
Voice campaign.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you for the compliment. And I'm going to start with a story about how I became involved in Let Toys Be Toys and why we campaign on something that seems a little bit odd to campaign on kids' toy marketing, perhaps. And it started really with when I had my own daughter and my son. And what really struck me was not how different they were, but how differently they were treated by everyone around them, and particularly in the toy industry, in the toy marketing. So I grew up in the 70s. I'm one of 4 girls, and our house had cars and dolls and a train set and Lego, and that seemed perfectly normal to us. So to see boys' toys and girls' toys signs up in shops actually came as a shock to me when I had my own kids and started buying toys for them. So a key moment was Christmas 2012. And I was in Next on Queen Street in Cardiff, where I live, and I reached out to pick a packet of plastic jungle animals. My daughter was really into leopards at the time. I knew she would love them. And then I saw boys' stuff in bold red letters on the packet and realised that it was going to be quite tough to explain to a 6-year-old why Santa thinks that leopards and giraffes are for boys. And I looked around and I realised that the packaging for every single toy in the shop, dinosaurs, pocket fans, puppets, yo-yos, every single one said boys' stuff on the packet. On the packaging itself, not just on the sign and on the shelf edge. And I asked myself, well, where's the girls' stuff in that case? Well, the boys are playing with their stuff and they're having fun and they're learning through play. And we talked about the importance of play. What are the girls doing? And I turned around and the unit behind me didn't say girls, and it didn't need to because every single item on it was pink. And there were no toys on it. It was filled with toiletries, pink sweets and pink makeup. No play, no learning. Merry Christmas, darling. Go and have a wash. Not fun. And I was angry. I felt really angry. And it's one shop. What's the big deal? The big deal, as we've said throughout, it's a situation where this is what our children see everywhere, where this seems so normal, so commonplace in meeting after meeting of product buyers and marketers and salespeople as they prepared their Christmas range. No one spotted that telling kids and shoppers that boys play and girls look pretty was a bit off. And it turned out that Christmas, I wasn't the only one to feel that we'd gone past some kind of a tipping point, as the Let Toys Be Toys campaign had just taken off a few weeks earlier, started on a thread on Mumsnet, and quickly turning into a group of people who were prepared to do some research and take some action to start to push back on these very narrow messages of signs like these, and later on similar titles on books. So Let Toys Be Toys remains a completely volunteer-run campaign. We've grown a social media following of thousands without spending a penny on marketing. And I think that's a measure of the latent concern about this issue among parents and educators. It felt like all we had to do was exist, And people came out of the woodwork to say, thank goodness somebody is talking about this. This has bothered me for a long time, and I didn't feel like I could do anything. And so since we started in 2012, 15 UK retailers have changed their marketing practices and have taken down boys' toys and girls' toy signs from shops, and 10 publishers have committed to no longer publish titles labelled for boys or for girls. So no more Brilliant Boys Book of Colouring and Beautiful Girls Book of Sparkly Butterflies. So explicit boys' toys and girls' toys signs are pretty much no longer visible in stores in the UK, at least. And boys and girls filters are less and less common on websites. And people are still able to buy toys. Children are still playing with toys. Change is possible, and it doesn't have to mean bad business. Quite the opposite. I believe that narrow stereotypes are seeming increasingly stale and irrelevant to consumers, and it's in the interest of business as well as in children and parents' interests to deliver change now.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Jess. And I think what we've heard from all the research and from your work is that actually, you know, we are pushing an open door. So although it feels like a massive mountain to climb,
absolutely,
in which way you look at it, I feel like at least we're partway up the mountain, if I can put it like that. And I think that a lot of that's down to you and what you've done. I'm just going to put a few questions to the panel myself now, and then we'll go to the Q&A function and pick some of the ones that have been asked. Becky, I wanted to come back to you and just put a question to you, just following on from what you were saying, thinking about your education expertise in particular. So thinking about early year settings in schools, were you surprised by how prevalent gender stereotyping is? Because in a way, we kind of think 2020, we should have got over this. It should have got the kind of assumption somehow that it really can't be that bad, can it? I mean, I had a conversation today in an interview where someone was basically saying to me, it really can't be that bad, can it? I said, well, it is actually, and they couldn't quite believe it. But, you know, were you surprised by what we found?
I must say not especially, because I suppose that when it's been the kind of mainstay of my work for so long, and as many of you know, I've also done some sort of rudimentary studies of toys and both their nature according to gender, but also the messages sent through those toys. The findings weren't new to me, but as I say, the ongoing prevalence, even at this date, I found very sort of disheartening in some ways. Although, as I always say, and as we've heard from Jess, in some ways, you know, we mustn't forget the changes and the achievements that we have seen. So change is possible, and that's also galvanizing. But just to exemplify in education settings, I mean, in the first decade of the 21st century, there was an enormously strong focus on boys' underachievement, as the mantra went. Actually, compared to many other gaps, you know, social background, for example, gender gaps in education are relatively small, and they very much centre around language and literacy, as I've said. Where one of the key changes at the turn of the century was that girls, following the national curriculum's introduction, were forced to study maths and science in a way that they hadn't previously, and sure enough actually caught up with boys at GCSE level quite quickly, whereas the opposite was not necessarily the case for boys catching up at language and literacy. And some of this, of course, is about stereotypes. So when we had this discourse about boys' underachievement, a whole plethora of very stereotypical reactions took place in the classroom, where stereotypes were often used sort of unwittingly by practitioners to incentivize and engage boys. So using, for example, footballs for awards for boys and something different for girls. thinking about, you know, different stereotypical ways of learning, and sort of challenging boys to sort of learn with their hands, kinesthetic learning styles and so forth, all of which wasn't based in any sort of evidence at all. But it was that push. And another classic was different reading boxes with different sorts of books for girls and boys, all of which has been shown to be very poor practice. And again, the more that boys and girls hear that different activities are appropriate for them, of course, we narrow those horizons rather than widen them. So no, I wasn't particularly surprised, but I guess, again, it really shows that we all need to be reflecting all the time. I don't think many people want to be gender stereotypical, but we really need this reflection on our actions. Those of us who have been Christmas shopping this year will have felt it already if we're buying for young children. It's very hard to do differently, but it's challenging ourselves collectively. I think that's important.
Yes, absolutely. And Janine, just coming to you now, just give us a bit more on the sort of changes you see when you make your interventions in the classroom, you know, working with young children or working with practitioners. How do you actually get them to challenge those stereotypes, and how do you see change happen?
Yeah, because I will say that I was surprised. I shouldn't have been, but we start with quite young kids. We start at year 1, so they're 5 turning 6, and the way we collected data for our pilot was through interviews and surveys. And you can't send a 5-year-old away with a survey to do and turn in. And so we had to kind of sit with each one of them and have a conversation with them and ask them the questions. And it was really interesting because when I was putting that survey together for the first time, I was like, but they know the right answer. Don't they actually know? When you ask them, can men do the same jobs as women? Are boys better at math? Are girls better at art? Like they all know the right answer, but they actually didn't. A lot of them didn't. And that in itself was shocking, because I think when you exist in your own little bubble, you forget that you might have told your kid this a million times. You might believe that they're getting it from school, but they're not even necessarily getting that surface message. So we interviewed every child before the program. Then our program consisted of lessons in school that are cross-curricular. So we worked with some amazing primary school teachers to create these lessons that were also teaching maths, teaching literacy, teaching science, because something else that frustrates me is that stereotypes is often kind of bundled up and taught as a PSHE lesson, when actually every lesson you're teaching has the potential to reinforce or break down stereotypes. So we tried to embed it in the core curriculum. And something we've added on since our pilot now is a home learning piece, because we saw good results from what we did, but also the parental environment, the home environment is so important. So we also have activity boxes that go home with the kids, and they bring back a piece to share with the class that they do at home. These were originally designed to be like lovely boxes they take home and then pass back to someone else in the class, and they get shared all around. And it was the least COVID-friendly thing a person could have possibly designed. So now they go home and stay there. But what we saw was, we saw a real decrease in the agreement with those stereotypical statements from just one term of lessons, because our pilot was just over a term. So things like we saw 40% decrease in the amount of children who said girls are supposed to like playing house, 46% increase in those who said that it's okay for boys to like playing house. And so, and across kind of careers, what kids can like, what kids can do, we saw that. But what was more interesting was the qualitative data we got just from having conversations with kids, because some of them who knew to say the right thing in the first instance, when you scratch the surface at the beginning, said things like, one boy said, I punch a tree when I'm sad. I can't tell anyone because no one will like me on the playground. Another boy said, being a builder is a man's job. Women can't carry heavy things like bricks. When 5 minutes earlier, he said, men and women can do the same thing, but women can't possibly carry bricks. And so we saw just from showing them different examples from these lessons, they said different things in the exit interviews, but I think the trick for us is making that change last. And that's why working across years and with families is really important. And also a big part of the change that we make is raising teacher awareness. So one teacher we worked with said that kind of the scales had fallen from her eyes, and it'll change the way that she teaches permanently. Because once you start looking for stereotypes, you can't unsee them and you can't stop finding them. And so if we can kind of remove the scales from more people's eyes, that has a huge impact on kind of every year 1 and year 2 class that person teaches going forward.
Thank you. And one of the things we're calling for in the report is for interventions like yours to be scaled up, right, to be properly invested in so that we can actually evidence their impact and then scale them up, because I think we need to get that reach out there to more young children. I mean, just coming to you now in terms of impact, because I just wanted to say a little bit more about the difference you see in the men that you work with, you know, because you're dealing with some really, really challenging situations there, and, you know, and the stereotypes that young Black men face in particular are sort of so overwhelming and so kind of embedded. So how do you see the impact of what you do? Oh, you're on mute.
I think to give a bit of context, I think we work, you know, in different ways, different strands across the work we do with fathers. So we have kind of the most universal piece we have is an expectant fathers course, a one-day course we run called Future Dads, which is basically self-selecting men who come on, who are interested in fatherhood, whose partners are delivering at a hospital where we're promoting this program, and who tell them to go on. That's the most universal men. These are the men who are most open and most keen and are self-selecting and seeking support around what it is to be a father and want to think about how they can maybe do things differently. We also run parent education programs, and our favorite is one we run in partnership with the Race Equality Foundation called Strengthening Families, Strengthening Communities, which has a big focus on looking at how you were parented and what was good from your childhood, bringing that forward into what you want to do now, living in the 21st century, maybe in a different country, definitely in a different time, and what things you want to leave behind in the past, which gives us real opportunity to start thinking about, you know, stereotypical things that maybe are not that healthy for them, things that maybe they held on to because they're part of their sense of self and identity, but maybe actually are practically not actually supporting where they want to go in their life today, to right at the very sharp end, working with men who are on occasion perpetrators of domestic abuse, running programs with local authorities to engage with men in families where there has been abuse and trying to get those men to change their behaviors and their attitudes. So, you know, we have a representation within all of our programs of about, across the board, 70 to 80% men from Black and Asian minority ethnic communities. And they face systemic barriers based on, you know, disproportionately ethnic minority men around their gender. You know, I think the world that they live in, when we try and discuss with them the effects of patriarchy and misogyny, which are often subjects that we're discussing with them for the first time in their lives when they're becoming fathers. These are guys who have been let down by education systems often, or have been channeled through the pathways that we've heard described already, where they're not asked or challenged around issues like structural sexism or racism, apart from how it affects them in their personal life. So those disproportionate effects affect them, and they see inequality, you know. And I think, as some of the panelists earlier on were talking about, you know, there is something about a collective action and about people drawing together and finding solidarity around the fact that we're all, whatever our however we've been affected by inequality, knowing that if we all work together to bring about a more equal society, we'll all benefit, you know. Then we move on to the personal aspect for them, in that as a father, I've seen how being discriminated against in the realm of parenthood has disproportionately hurt me and hurt my children. We can then use that as a prism for them to look through to see how the patriarchy that they may have inadvertently or even purposefully benefited from in their lives is actually a kind of shell. It's kind of like a facade that holds up this belief for them that you're happy if you've got a car, if you're out and about partying, if you're getting a degree of self-esteem within the community for behaviors that were typically viewed as male behaviors, but actually aren't making you happy and actually making the bit of your life you think is important, your family, less obtainable for you. How do we put practical steps in place to change that? And that starts with having conversations about that, about basic education, about promoting the idea of being a critical thinker and being able to break away from stereotypes. And some of the guys we work with, you know, not just Black guys, but young white British working class guys who have as much vested interest in being holding on to some of the traditional and more, you know, for want of a better word, toxic aspects of older masculinity models. You know, they begin to see that actually, you know, as I mature and grow, and as I look at older men around me, I see that, you know, the pathway in front of me is not all rosy. I'm not going to end up in a position of power. Those places are reserved for a limited amount of men. And even those men who we speak to sometimes as well through our universal services, actually on reflection realize that, you know, devoting a lifetime to this breadwinner role and focusing totally on work and on that dynamic has left them with an empty feeling when they come back to looking on their lives, and when they review maybe some of their younger peers, the involvement they've got in their family lives, and they feel as though they've missed out, you know. And the final point again was similar to the point Janine made at the beginning, that maybe growing up as I did, I've got 3 daughters, so I've got a personal interest, and I speak passionately to the men I work with because, as I said earlier on, a large proportion, if not 50-50 split between them, have daughters. And I try to work with them to explain to them how tiring it would be to, the only way their daughters could actually enjoy a free and safe life is if they're followed around by their father for the whole of their lives, you know. And they start to go, yeah, actually, yeah, you've got a point there. I want my daughters to be free, and I want them to be able to achieve. I don't want limits to be placed upon them by society, by boys and men around them, by anyone. So then you can start unpicking, well, if that's not what you want, you have to start modeling that behavior at home, and you have to start modeling that behavior in the way you deal with your relationships and in your expectations, you know. And I think they then start to see very easily all of the injustices when they're out buying clothes for their daughters. And as you say, some of the messages that are put on the tops and the t-shirts that are overtly sexualizing of young girls, or pinning boys into roles of, you know, I'm going to be a scientist or I'm going to be a race car driver. Sometimes, you know, fathers with daughters find it easier to challenge that because maybe that fits within their gender norm to do so. But also they realize I didn't enjoy having these expectations put on me, especially when I didn't feel I could reach some of the goals that were laid out for me as a man. You know, many of them, especially ethnic minority men, find that both parents are having to work, you know, just to make ends meet. So the idea of wanting to hold on to the breadwinner role is no longer practicable for them. You know, also, you know, the reality is in some cases, mum has better earning potential. You know, for some, you know, some of our guys leave school, they haven't achieved academically. You know, we're trying to convince some of the guys who we work with at the sharpest end to move away from illegitimate ways of making money, and therefore they have to start at the real bottom of the run of the ladder with work. So sometimes it makes sense for them to take a bigger role in the caring field and at home, and let mum go out into the professional world and kind of play that what would have been a traditional male provider role. And I think guys are being, through circumstance, put into that position. Some struggle with it and we help them with that. Others sometimes are actually quite happy with it and are really enjoying the dynamic that in the 21st century they can do something different than their fathers and their mothers had to do. So yeah.
So not the stereotype at all.
No, and I think, again, for the men themselves, whilst, yes, they want it for their daughters, once they're freed up and they start to see the benefits for them within changing some of their stereotypically held views, they're happier people. And in terms of men's mental health and well-being, knowing that suicide is the biggest killer of men under 45, particularly for young men, particularly, this really helps them kind of find some peace and solace, and actually gets them on a pathway to exploring new ways to be happy in life, which is really important.
Absolutely. And now I just want to go to some of the questions in the chat. I know we're slightly running behind time, but I'm going to take a couple of them. One that we had, I just want to go to you with, Becky, just about, does it make any difference to have men into education roles in childcare? Did we reach a conclusion? Do you want to just quickly answer that one, then I'll put another question to the panel.
Sorry, you cut out slightly there, Sam, but I think you were asking about do we need more male role models in childcare and so on?
Does it make any difference?
Yeah, okay. Well, the literature here, which I've contributed to in my own research, shows that actually the teacher gender doesn't make any impact at all on actual educational outcomes. And perhaps not surprisingly, although we did both quantitative and qualitative work here, the qualitative research showed that actually what kids care about is A, the expertise of the teacher, and B, whether the teacher cares about them, rather than anything to do with gender. But nevertheless, that's not at all to suggest that teacher gender makes no difference at all. It's really important that in all spheres of society and career areas, we have a good gender balance, both to illustrate to young people what is open to them and feel that they have that diverse support as well. So we'd definitely be wanting to support men into the early years, basically because I would like to see greater representation and balance across the board.
And I think that's reflected in the report. Actually, we've included that in the report. And Jess, I just want to come back to you. There's a question here about birthday cards and selling cards and you know, signage in shops. And I just wondered if you could say a little bit more about sort of the wider kind of retail environment and thinking sort of beyond your kind of Let Toys Be Toys campaign. You know, to what extent does it really kind of make a difference? And actually, you know, should we be focusing on online spaces now, really, rather than physical shops? I mean, given how much we've all shifted to buying online, for example, in the last few months, what does that mean about your campaign, the kind of changes we need to see?
I guess that, I mean, to speak to cards, I mean, that's not something we've looked specifically at, but clearly, you know, toys, books, you know, this is an issue across all kinds of products. And one of the things that I think has been a really interesting trend and has been one of the drivers to why toy marketing has become so much more gendered than it was 30 or 40 years ago is that, you know, I mean, essentially people have a lot more stuff than they had 30 or 40 years ago, and that it's been very lucrative to convince people that you need two versions of things. You need the blue one for your son, and then, you know, because he can't possibly drink from a pink cup. And so you've got that kind of, I mean, it's quite destructive, and from an environmental point of view, obviously, it's extremely concerning. That you know, we're being kind of coached to feel that we need kind of gender tailored things that we don't need, that we can repeat. And I think that's right across, you know, when you see sort of pink and blue chairs or, you know, pink and blue camping equipment or whatever, you know, these things are not necessary. To go back to the other side of your question about kind of why does it matter? Was that the second part of the question, Sam?
Well, yeah, and just fundamentally, how do we, in a world which is shifted online, really drive change in that space? Because, you know, it's about algorithms, it's about you know, the kinds of things that ultimately, you know, you put one thing into a computer and it effectively decides 10 things for you. So how do we change that?
Yeah, I think that how you present goods online is quite interesting. It's different in that obviously you don't tend to have, you can find a product in multiple ways online. You walk into a shop and it's only in one location, right? And it has one sign above it. And so tackling signage in shops was a relatively straightforward thing that we were asking stores to do. When it came to websites, obviously, you know, our first ask to toy companies was, well, you know, you shouldn't have a section that's boys' toys, but actually relatively few of them did, because of course you could navigate via dolls, or you could navigate via gender as a filter. And what a lot of companies, or what initially the feedback we would get is people use these search terms. We have to use them because people search for these search terms. And actually what in two instances happened is that the same companies then subsequently removed those filters, removed those boys, girls filters. And in the one occasion where we were able to engage with them afterwards, they admitted, and I'm sure this was the case in the other example, that actually when they looked at the statistics, those searches did not drive sales. So people were coming online and they were searching for boys age 6 toys or whatever, but what they actually meant was, I have no idea what I'm looking for. What they basically meant was, I'm buying for a child I don't know, and these are the only facts that I have. And so, you know, when this has been touched on earlier, that, you know, I think Andrew said, you know, that actually at some level this gendered marketing is kind of convenient for everybody. It gives us a right answer to what do I buy for the 6-year-old boy I don't know, a socially acceptable answer. And what we've been trying to highlight through our campaigning is to go, actually that has harms all the way down. And so it means it's a change, not just for the companies, because what we found talking to companies is they're like, well, it's the consumers, that's what they want. And, you know, the manufacturers will be, well, this is what retailers tell they want. Everybody feels helpless. But actually, if we all change and go, do you know what, if I walk into a shop for searching for something, or I'm on a website searching for something for a child I don't know, actually the fact that it's a boy isn't really going to be a particularly useful piece of information. Either I should find out more, or I should or I should just, you know, use their age as a reasonable guide to what kind of thing might be suitable. So it's a change for shoppers, it's a change for parents, as well as for the industry, and to recognize that, you know, we can't just keep all pointing the finger at everybody else.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, again, our report does that in terms of specifying that everyone needs to make change. But I'm running over time. We're just about to run over time. I'm going to give you all a quick final word, one phrase. What's the one thing you really want government to do now? So I'll come to Becky first. What's the one thing in response to all of these recommendations you'd like government to do?
Support change.
Support change, absolutely. And fund it, hopefully. Even. Janine, what would you say?
Take inequality as seriously as they take core subjects.
That's a good one. I like that one. Owen, what about you?
I echo my fellow panelists' thoughts, but I think maybe including intersectionality, you know, how all of these different levels of inequality cross over each other, and again, as you said, relating that to everything we teach our children in the school space, but in informal spaces as well, youth settings, and within the home.
Wonderful. And Jess, final word from you.
What I would love to see the government doing in relation to the commercial sector is to create space for a compact, similar to what we've seen in France. You know, we're not calling for regulation. Personally, I don't think that's the right way forward. But what we see in the industry is a lot of fear about everybody else. So I think if there's space for people to come together and say, we're all going to take action on this, I think there's actually a lot of appetite within the commercial sector to make things happen. And I think the government can open the door to that.
I think you're absolutely right. I think we are potentially on the cusp of something if we could just kind of galvanise all of these different actors. And it's a bit of a potentially herding cats moment, but you never know, we might get somewhere if we keep at it. I want to say a massive thank you to our panellists, to Becky, Janine, Owen and Jess, and to also Gillian, who joined us earlier, and to Andrew for all the work on the report. Thank you to the Fawcett team, who've been doing a brilliant job at running this event tonight and have done a brilliant job all year round in running these Zoom events that we've been holding. Thank you to you for joining. If you're not yet a Fawcett member, but you'd like to join, please go to our website and sign up as a member. You can also donate to support our Christmas appeal, Women for Refugee Women. I think there's a link in the chat function right now. So please do go in and support that Christmas appeal if you possibly can. This has been a brilliant project. I've loved every minute of it, and I'm almost sad to see it end, but also a bit relieved, if I'm honest. And it's also my final farewell from Fawcett, so a bit of a mic drop moment for me. But thank you to everyone who supported our work, been with us on this journey, and been really part of our campaigning efforts and research work that we've done over the last 5.5 years that I've been with the organisation. And I know it's going to go on to great things, and I shall still be involved in equality, social justice and all the causes I care about. I'll just do it with a bit less stress, hopefully. But thank you all, and happy Christmas to everyone. Stay safe, stay well. Thank you. Bye-bye.